The massive training hall of the Galactic Military Academy echoed with the sound of combat drills. Among the towering alien cadets, Jane Miller looked ridiculously small. Her plain blue uniform stood out against the specialized environment suits worn by her classmates, some with extra arms, others with reinforced exoskeletons, and a few who seemed to float rather than walk. Group 4 advanced to the obstacle course. Commander Stone's voice boomed through the hall. His crystalline body structure sparkled under the bright lights as he gestured toward the formidable training setup. Jane took her position at the starting line, trying to ignore the snickers from the other cadets. Next to her stood Thorn, a 7-foot-tall cadet with naturally armored skin. On her other side was Pulse, whose body crackled with bioelectrical energy. Both of them, like everyone else in the academy, were clearly built for war. The obstacle course started with a gravity-enhanced wall climb. While the other cadets used their natural abilities to scale it easily, Jane struggled with each handhold. Her muscles burned as she pulled herself up, falling behind within the first 30 seconds. Pathetic, someone whispered loud enough for her to hear. Who let a human into the elite program anyway? Jane grit her teeth and kept climbing. By the time she reached the top, the others were already halfway through the tunnel crawl. She jumped down, using the technique she practiced countless times in private, and ran toward the next obstacle. The tunnel crawl was actually easier for her smaller frame, but the gap was too large to close. When she emerged, covered in training mud, the rest of her group had already finished the course. Commander Stone's crystalline features showed no emotion as he marked her time. Miller, 2 minutes behind acceptable standard. Again, he turned to address the whole class. The Galactic Defense Force requires peak performance. Natural combat ability is essential for survival in modern warfare. Jane stood at attention, trying to keep her face neutral as her classmates smirked. She was the first human ever admitted to the academy, and after 3 months, it was clear why no others had made it before. During the next exercise, combat forms, Jane's limitations became even more apparent. While Thorn demonstrated a perfect execution of the 7th combat form, his armored plates shifting with fluid grace, Jane's human joints and muscles couldn't even approximate the movements. Miller, that's not even close to the correct form. Commander Stone's voice cut through the training hall. How do you expect to engage in combat if you can't perform basic forms? Sir, I'm adapting the form to human physiology, sir, Jane replied, standing straight. Adapting. The forms have been perfected over centuries by the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They don't need adaptation. Stone's crystalline body flickered with disapproval. After the class, Jane walked alone to the dining hall. The tables were designed for various alien physiologies, and she had to use a height adapter just to reach her food. As she ate her specially prepared human-safe meal, she observed her classmates. Pulse was demonstrating some kind of energy manipulation to a group of admirers. Thorn and his friends were discussing advanced combat techniques. Even the maintenance android, Blitz, seemed to fit in better than she did, as it efficiently cleaned and repaired training equipment. That evening, in her small quarters, Jane sat on her bed looking at her academy acceptance letter. It had been a miracle to get in, the first human to pass the entrance exams. But now, facing the reality of her physical limitations, doubt crept in. She pulled up the day's training footage on her datapad, watching her failed attempts at the combat forms. There had to be a way to make this work. Humans had fought wars for thousands of years before joining the galactic community. They had developed countless fighting styles and strategies. As she studied her movements, she began to notice something. Where others relied on natural weapons or abilities, she had to think through each move. While they fought with pure instinct, she had to be tactical. Jane smiled slightly as an idea formed in her mind. Maybe being different wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was time to stop trying to fight like the others and start fighting like a human. The Academy's training halls were eerily quiet at midnight. Jane slipped through the dimly lit corridors, making her way to the simulation chamber. She had discovered that the facility remained powered but unmonitored during the night cycle, a detail she learned from her only friend. "You are early today, Cadet Miller." Blitz's mechanical voice came from the shadows. The maintenance android's optical sensors glowed a soft blue as it emerged from its charging station. "Couldn't sleep, Blitz." "Too many ideas to test." Jane pulled out her datapad, showing the android a series of combat movements she had sketched. "I've been studying old Earth martial arts. There's something here we can use." Blitz's processors whirred as it analyzed the diagrams. "These movements differ significantly from standard academy forms. They appear inefficient." "That's exactly the point," Jane said, entering the simulation chamber. "Everyone here fights like they're supposed to. They follow the rules of combat that work for their species. But humans, we had to get creative." She activated the training program, and a holographic opponent materialized, a replica of Thorn's species. "Start recording, Blitz. I want to test something." The hologram charged forward, its armored body moving in the perfect seventh combat form. Instead of attempting to match its strength, Jane ducked and weaved. She used the opponent's momentum against it, just like in the ancient human martial art of judo. "Fascinating," Blitz commented, recording every move. "You are exploiting gaps in the standard combat forms." Jane continued training, her movements becoming more fluid with each attempt. She incorporated techniques from various Earth martial arts: the efficiency of Wing Chun, the precision of Krav Maga, the adaptability of mixed martial arts. Hours passed as she refined her approach. "Your heart rate remained stable," Blitz noted after her 15th simulation. "Other species typically show significant fatigue at this point." "Human endurance," Jane explained, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We evolved as persistence hunters. We can't outpower them, but we can outlast them." She pulled up historical footage on her datapad: ancient human battles, boxing matches, wrestling tournaments. "Look at this, Blitz. Humans have always been outmatched in raw strength. But we learn to observe, adapt, and overcome." The android's processors hummed as it analyzed the footage. These techniques rely heavily on psychological elements: deception, misdirection. The Academy combat forms do not account for such factors. "Exactly," Jane grinned. "Everyone here fights like their species, predictably. They rely on their natural advantages. But humans, we're the wild card. We had to learn to fight smarter, not harder." She started another simulation, this time against a replica of Pulse's species. The hologram crackled with bioelectrical energy, but Jane had studied its patterns. She timed her movements between the energy pulses, using her smaller size to strike at weak points. "Your success rate has increased by 47% since last week," Blitz observed. "However, these methods would be considered unorthodox by Academy standards." "Good," Jane said, catching her breath. "The last thing they'll expect is unorthodox. Help me set up multiple opponents, Blitz. I need to practice fighting against groups." As the android adjusted the simulation parameters, Jane reflected on her progress. The standard combat forms taught at the Academy were like a language, one that her body couldn't speak. But she was creating her own dialect, one that played to human strengths. "Simulation ready," Blitz announced. 3 opponents, varying species. Training protocol initiated. Jane stepped into position, her muscles tired, but her mind sharp. The holograms materialized, a mix of different alien species, each with their own natural weapons and abilities. She smiled, remembering something from Earth's history. "You know, Blitz," she said as the holograms began to move, "humans have a saying: the more powerful the opponent, the harder they fall. Let's put that to the test." The simulation chamber filled with the sound of combat as Jane began her dance of adaptation, turning her perceived weaknesses into strengths, one movement at a time. The afternoon combat class started like any other, with cadets paired for sparring matches. Jane stood in formation, trying to ignore the familiar feeling of being the smallest one in the room. But today felt different. Her secret training was starting to show results. Rex, a senior cadet from the elite claw section, strutted to the center of the training mat. His metallic scales gleamed under the lights as he flexed his forearms, each ending in razor-sharp claws. He was the Academy's top-ranked fighter, and everyone knew it. Today, Commander Stone announced, "We'll demonstrate proper combat techniques against disadvantaged opponents." His crystalline head turned deliberately toward Jane. "Miller, step forward." Jane's heart raced as she walked to the mat. She could hear the other cadets whispering and snickering. Rex's mouth curled into what passed for a smile among his species. "Begin," Commander Stone ordered. Rex moved with frightening speed, all four arms launching into the Academy's perfect attack sequence. 3 months ago, this would have ended in seconds. But Jane had spent countless nights studying this exact form. She slipped between his strikes, using her smaller size to avoid his claws. Rex's eyes widened in surprise as she ducked under his guard, a move that wasn't part of any Academy combat form. "Incorrect form, Miller," Commander Stone barked. "Execute proper defense sequence." But Jane was done following forms she couldn't perform. She rolled beneath Rex's next attack, coming up inside his reach. The other cadets gasped as she landed a precise strike to a joint between his scales, a weak point she discovered during her late-night studies. Rex snarled, his pride hurt more than his body. He abandoned proper form, all four arms slashing wildly. One claw caught Jane's uniform, tearing fabric and drawing blood. "Enough," Commander Stone commanded, stepping forward. "This display is pathetic. Miller, you make a mockery of Academy traditions. Rex, control yourself." Jane stood at attention, blood dripping from her arm, but her head held high. She had lasted longer against Rex than any junior cadet in Academy history, but all Commander Stone saw was her failure to follow proper form. "Miller," Stone's voice was cold. "Report to my office after class. We need to discuss your future at this academy." The other cadets laughed as Jane walked to the medical station, all except Rex, who glared at her with barely contained rage. She had embarrassed him, and everyone knew it. In Commander Stone's office, the crystalline instructor loomed over his desk. "Miller, your performance today was unacceptable. You disregarded centuries of proven combat doctrine." "Sir, the standard forms don't work for human physiology. I've been developing alternative." Silence. Stone's body flickered with anger. "This academy has trained the galaxy's finest warriors for generations. Our methods are perfect. If you cannot execute them properly, perhaps you don't belong here." "Sir, with respect, combat isn't about following perfect forms. It's about winning. Get out." Stone's voice was quiet but sharp. "Consider withdrawing from the academy. Save yourself further embarrassment." Jane walked slowly back to her quarters, her arm bandaged but her spirit unbowed. On her datapad, she pulled up the footage from her match with Rex. There it was, the moment she'd caught him off guard. Proof that her strategy could work. A message flashed on her screen. It was from Blitz. "Combat simulation chamber ready for night training. New programs installed." She smiled, remembering all the times humans have been underestimated throughout history. How many battles had been won not by the stronger side, but by the more adaptable one. Her arm throbbed as she gathered her training gear. Commander Stone was right about one thing. The Academy had trained the galaxy's finest warriors, but they had never trained a human before, and humans had a long history of changing the rules. Tonight, she would train harder. Tomorrow, she would be better. And soon, she would show them all that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their muscles or claws or natural weapons. It was in their ability to adapt, to think differently, and to turn their weaknesses into strengths. Let them laugh. She had found her edge, and she was going to sharpen it. The midnight hum of the simulation chamber had become Jane's favorite sound. 3 weeks had passed since her confrontation with Rex, and every night she pushed herself harder. Tonight was different, though. She had a new plan. "Blitz, show me the analysis of the top 5 species of the Academy," Jane requested, studying the holographic displays. The android projected detailed anatomical models in the air. "Combat analysis complete," Blitz reported. "Each species demonstrates distinct biological advantages. The claw species possesses superior reaction speed. Crystal forms like Commander Stone have natural armor. Energy beings like Pulse." "Stop," Jane interrupted, pointing to a pattern in the data. "Look at their recovery times. Every species has a natural rest cycle between intense actions. Even Rex needs a split second to reset his stance between attacks." She walked through the holograms, her mind racing. "Humans don't have the fastest muscles or the strongest bones, but we have something else. We can maintain continuous action longer than any other species here." Jane started a new simulation, this time against multiple opponents. As the holograms attacked, she kept moving, never stopping, never giving them time to reset. Her movements flowed from one to the next, incorporating techniques from Earth's various martial arts. "Fascinating," Blitz observed. "You are exploiting the microsecond gaps in their combat patterns." "Exactly," Jane panted, dodging a holographic claw strike. "They all fight in bursts. Powerful, but predictable. Humans evolved for endurance hunting. We can keep going when others need to pause." She trained for hours, refining her technique. Where other species relied on burst speed or power, she developed a flowing style that never gave them time to use their natural advantages. It wasn't about matching their strength. It was about denying them the chance to use it. "Your oxygen efficiency has improved by 23% since last month," Blitz noted. "However, your technique still appears chaotic compared to Academy standards." Jane grinned, wiping sweat from her face. "That's the point. They're all trained to counter standard attacks. But this," she demonstrated a combination of moves that seamlessly blended different Earth martial arts. "This isn't in any of their combat databases." She pulled up footage of her previous training sessions, analyzing her movements. "See how they always expect a pause after each attack? That's when they're programmed to counter. But if I keep moving, keep attacking from unexpected angles." Blitz's processors whirred as it updated its combat algorithms. "You are creating a new fighting style based on continuous motion and psychological manipulation. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years," Jane explained. "When we couldn't overpower our prey, we exhausted it. When we couldn't match our enemy's strength, we outsmarted them." She started another simulation, this time incorporating deliberate feints and misdirections into her attacks. The holograms, programmed with standard Academy responses, couldn't adapt to her unpredictable style. "Your success rate now exceeds 70% against single opponents," Blitz reported. "However, multiple attackers still pose significant challenge." "Then let's work on that." Jane took a quick drink of water. "Start multi-opponent scenario, maximum difficulty." As the holograms surrounded her, Jane felt a calm confidence she hadn't known before. She wasn't trying to be stronger than them anymore. She was being smarter, more adaptable, more human. The simulation chamber filled with the dance of combat as Jane wove between her opponents. She used their strength against them, turned their perfect forms into predictable patterns, and exploited every microsecond gap in their attacks. Hours later, as the Academy's artificial dawn approached, Jane reviewed her progress with Blitz. Her body ached, but her mind was sharp. "You know what's funny?" she said, watching replays of her training. "They all think I'm failing because I can't perform their combat forms perfectly. They don't realize I'm not trying to fight like them anymore." Blitz's optical sensors focused on her. "You are fighting like a human." "Exactly." Jane stood, gathering her gear as the first light of morning crept through the Academy's windows. "And soon, they're going to learn why humans survived long enough to reach the stars." She had found her path, not by trying to match the strength of other species, but by embracing what made humans unique: their adaptability, their endurance, and their ability to turn disadvantages into strengths. The preliminary combat trials arrived with a buzz of excitement in the academy. Cadets gathered in the main arena, where floating cameras would record every match. Jane stood quietly in line as Commander Stone announced the rules. Each cadet will face 3 opponents of increasing rank. Stone's crystalline form sparkled as he spoke. Victory is achieved by submission or incapacitation. First match begins in 10 minutes. Jane checked her uniform one last time. Months of secret training had changed her body, not with bulk or obvious strength, but with a lean efficiency that none of her classmates had noticed. First match, Cadet Miller versus Cadet Spark. Commander Stone announced. Spark, a being of pure energy contained in a humanoid form, crackled with confidence as he stepped onto the mat. He was ranked in the middle of their class, known for overwhelming opponents with quick bursts of energy. Begin. Spark launched forward, his body releasing controlled pulses of energy, a technique that had defeated many other cadets. But Jane had studied his patterns in her late-night training sessions. She moved in a constant flow, never staying still enough to be hit, never giving him time to build up a stronger charge. The audience grew quiet as they watched. This wasn't the same human cadet who had struggled with basic forms. This was something different. Spark's energy crackled more intensely as frustration set in. He launched a series of rapid attacks, but each one met empty air as Jane weaved between them. Then, just as his energy cycle needed to reset, she struck. 3 precise hits to key points in his containment field. Weakness she had discovered during her research. Spark's energy form flickered, destabilized, and he dropped to one knee. Match concluded. Victory to Cadet Miller, Commander Stone announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise. The arena burst into confused murmurs. Jane caught glimpses of shocked faces as she returned to the waiting area. She had won, but not by using any technique taught at the academy. Second match, Cadet Miller versus Cadet Crest. Crest was a tall, crystalline being like Commander Stone, ranked in the upper quarter of the class. His natural armor made him nearly impervious to standard attacks. This time, the audience watched with real interest. Jane's first victory could have been luck, but could she repeat it? The match began, and Crest moved with the perfect form the academy taught. Each strike was textbook, each defense was flawless. But Jane didn't fight back. She flowed around him like water, never meeting his strength directly. Crest's perfect form became his weakness. His attacks were powerful but predictable. Jane moved in patterns that made no sense to academy-trained eyes, combining techniques from a dozen earth martial arts. When she struck, it wasn't at his armored exterior. She targeted the joints, the small gaps, the microsecond pauses between his movements. Crest tried to adjust, but centuries of rigid training worked against him. The crystalline cadet fell, unable to cope with an opponent who refused to fight according to the rules he understood. Match concluded. Victory to Cadet Miller. Now the arena was really buzzing. Cadets stood to get a better view. Even Commander Stone leaned forward slightly. Final preliminary match. Cadet Miller versus Cadet Blade. Blade was a senior cadet, his blade-lined exoskeleton making him one of the most dangerous fighters in the academy. He had never lost a preliminary match. As they faced each other, Blade's expression showed no concern. After all, he had watched her previous matches. She was still just a human, still bound by human limitations. The match began, and Blade attacked with devastating speed. But where others saw human limitations, Jane had found human advantages. She matched his speed not with power, but with continuous motion, never letting him set up his strongest attacks. Blade's frustration grew as none of his techniques connected. He had trained to fight academy styles, not this flowing, unpredictable movement. When his blade-lined arm slashed through the air, Jane was already behind him. The match ended with Blade on the mat, his own momentum used against him in a technique no one in the academy had seen before. Match concluded. Victory to Cadet Miller. Preliminary trials complete. The arena erupted in chaos. Jane stood calmly in the center, breathing steadily. She caught Commander Stone's eye and saw something she had never seen before: uncertainty. The human cadet wasn't just passing the trials, she was rewriting them. Rex slammed his 4 fists onto Commander Stone's desk, leaving small dents in the metal surface. "I demand a match against Miller. She's making a mockery of our combat traditions." The crystalline instructor studied the angry senior cadet. The entire academy was buzzing about Jane's victories in the preliminary trials. Her unorthodox fighting style had sparked heated debates among both students and faculty. "Very well," Commander Stone decided. "A public demonstration match, tomorrow at noon." The news spread through the academy like wildfire. The combat arena was packed the next day, with cadets of every species crowding the stands. Some came to see Rex restore the academy's honor. Others hoped to witness another display of human adaptability. Jane stood calmly on one side of the arena, looking small compared to Rex's imposing form. His metallic scales gleamed under the lights as he flexed all 4 arms, razor-sharp claws extended. "This will be a full combat match," Commander Stone announced. "Academy regulations apply. Begin." Rex launched forward with devastating speed, all 4 arms moving in perfect coordination. His claws traced deadly arcs through the air as he executed the most advanced combat forms in the Academy's arsenal. But Jane wasn't there. She moved like water around his attacks, never meeting his strength directly. Where Rex's movements were powerful and precise, hers flowed without pause or pattern. The audience watched in fascination as she turned his perfect forms against him. "Fight properly," Rex roared, his attacks becoming more aggressive. "Face me like a warrior." "I am," Jane replied calmly, sliding past another claw strike. "Just not the kind you're used to." Rex's frustration grew with each missed attack. He had never faced an opponent who refused to fight according to Academy rules. His perfect forms became sloppy as anger took over. Jane saw her opening. As Rex committed to a powerful 4-armed strike, she moved inside his guard. Her strikes weren't powerful by Academy standards, but they hit precisely where they needed to. The crowd gasped as Rex staggered. One arm dropped limply. She had struck a nerve cluster between his scales. Before he could recover, she was moving again. "Impossible," someone shouted from the stands. "She's using forbidden strike points." "No," Commander Stone corrected, his crystalline form shifting with interest. "She's using strike points we never considered, points unique to each species." Rex roared and charged, abandoning all pretense of proper form. But this was exactly what Jane had trained for. She used his momentum against him, adding her own force to his charge. The mighty claw warrior found himself airborne, his own strength turned into a weapon against him. He crashed to the mat with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. Before he could rise, Jane was there, her fingers pressed against 3 critical points on his neck, points she had discovered during countless hours of studying alien anatomy. Rex tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. She had temporarily paralyzed his nervous system's connection points, not through strength, but through precise knowledge and perfect timing. The arena fell silent. "Match concluded," Commander Stone announced, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. "Victory to Cadet Miller." Jane helped Rex up as the paralysis wore off. The larger cadet stood unsteadily, looking at her with new eyes. There was no more mockery in his gaze, only dawning understanding. "How?" he asked quietly. "Those movements. They're not in any combat manual." "They're from Earth," Jane explained. "Thousands of years of humans learning to fight stronger opponents. We call it martial arts, but it's really the art of adaptation." Commander Stone approached them, his crystalline body refracting the arena lights. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we have much to learn about human combat techniques." The crowd began to disperse, but the excitement remained. They had witnessed something unprecedented, A human cadet defeating one of the Academy's strongest warriors not through superior strength or speed, but through a completely different approach to combat. Jane looked around the arena, remembering her first day when everyone thought she was a joke. Now they watched her with respect, curiosity, and maybe a little fear. She had done more than win a match. She had shown them that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their muscles or weapons, but in their ability to adapt and overcome. The Academy's main hall buzzed with anticipation as Commander Stone took the podium. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed combat scores from the past decade. Every senior instructor and cadet was present for the final rankings announcement. Today, Stone's crystalline form glowed as he spoke. We must acknowledge something unprecedented in Academy history. He gestured, and the scores began to scroll. The highest combat trial scores in the past 10 years belonged to Cadet Jane Miller. The hall erupted in a mix of gasps and excited chatter. Jane stood at attention in the front row, her face calm but her heart racing. The scores floated above them. Her unconventional techniques had earned marks that surpassed even legendary Academy graduates. Furthermore, Stone continued, the Combat Studies Board has reviewed Cadet Miller's training methods. We have discovered that human combat adaptation offers unique tactical advantages we had not considered. The holographic display shifted to show recordings of Jane's matches. Her fluid movements, her continuous attack pattern, her precise targeting of species-specific weaknesses, all displayed in perfect detail. Therefore, effective immediately, Cadet Miller is promoted to the rank of Combat Tactics Instructor. She will develop a new training program combining traditional Academy forms with human adaptive combat techniques. Rex, his metallic scales gleaming, was the first to stand and salute. The gesture meant more coming from him. The former champion who had learned firsthand the effectiveness of human combat methods. Cadet Miller, Commander Stone turned to face her directly. Step forward. Jane walked to the podium, remembering her first day at the Academy. How they had laughed at the small human who couldn't perform proper combat forms. Now those same cadets watched her with respect. Your achievement goes beyond personal victory, Stone said. You have shown us that true combat mastery isn't about following established patterns. It's about understanding and adaptation. He handed her a crystalline badge, the mark of an Academy instructor. The galaxy is vast, with countless species and combat styles we have yet to encounter. Your human perspective will help prepare our warriors for the unknown. Jane accepted the badge, then turned to address the assembled cadets. In human history, she began, we often succeeded not because we were the strongest, but because we learned to adapt. Every species has strengths and weaknesses. True combat mastery is understanding both your own and your opponent's. The hall filled with approving murmurs. Already, cadets were discussing how to incorporate human techniques into their training. Even the most traditional instructors were reviewing their methods, considering how adaptation could improve their teaching. Blitz, watching from its maintenance station, recorded everything. The android had helped Jane develop her unique style, and now it would assist in teaching others. Its databases were already being updated with human combat principles. Your first class begins tomorrow, Commander Stone announced. All senior cadets will attend. We have much to learn about human combat philosophy. After the ceremony, Jane walked through the training halls, the same halls where she had once trained in secret. Now they would be her classroom, where she would teach others that strength alone doesn't determine victory. Rex approached her, his 4 arms crossed respectfully. The things you taught me during our match, he said, about using an opponent's energy against them. I want to learn more. Jane smiled. That's the first lesson of human combat. There's always more to learn, even from those you might underestimate. As the Academy's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Jane stood in the simulation chamber where it had all begun. But now she wasn't alone. A group of cadets from various species had gathered, eager to start learning. The galaxy is full of surprises, she told them. We can either stick to what we know and be surprised, or learn to adapt and be ready for anything. Commander Stone watched from the observation deck as Jane began her first lesson. His crystalline form reflected the light differently now. There was respect in every facet. The human Cadet who had been a joke had become something more. She had become proof that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest victory is showing others a new way to think. The galaxy, it seemed, had much to learn from humans after all.